And the majority of those kings were corrupt. The majority of the kings began to cause the people to slip into idolatry and all kinds of things, sacrificing their children and all that, because they left and rejected God. But over a period of time, God sent prophets to them and told them, change your ways. Wow. He kept sending prophet after prophet after prophet. But God did not do it immediately, but he kept sending. And the more prophets he sent, the more the prophets were hated and rejected and even killed, because they did not want to take heed to what God said. Well, the time came when God said, okay, I love you so much, I'm not going to allow the Assyrians to completely come and to wipe you out. I am going to allow them to be able to touch you where it hurts. And that's what happened. It touched him, it touched the nation where it hurt us. And so when you deal with Israel and America, I'm getting ready to explain to you why did God show him Israel and America together at this time. It's all happening again according to the same pattern, according to the judgment of ancient Israel. The harbingers, which are 9 of them, appeared in the last days of Israel, are now appearing in America in our day. In other words, God sent harbingers when Israel was acting up. He sent warnings. He sent 9 warnings. And they didn't take heed. But now those same warnings are in our land right now.
That's good teaching.
Right where we sit.
Good teaching.
Each one manifesting on America's soil, each one containing a prophetic message. And upon these, and our response to these messages, the future of this nation hangs. What I'm doing is I'm getting things out of here, and I'm working around it to highlight on some of the things that he is saying, so that we can have a complete understanding. Y'all follow me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not going just word for word here, but I'm trying to make sure that we understand what is being said here. Okay, so you have Israel and you have America. Now I want to read something to you in this book. And I want you to listen to this. He's talking about Israel and America. He said, unless you understand what happened then, you'll never understand what's happening now. So we got to understand what happened, what message did God give Israel then? And what is he telling us now? He says, what does America have to do with ancient Israel? Israel was unique among nations in that it was conceived and dedicated at its foundation for the purposes of God. But there was one other, a civilization also conceived and dedicated to the will of God from its conception, America. In fact, those who laid its foundations. The founding fathers know, long before the founding fathers, those who laid America's foundations saw it as a new Israel, an Israel of the new world. And as with ancient Israel, they saw it as in covenant with God, meaning its rise or fall will be dependent on its relationship with God.
Come on.
If it followed his ways, America will become the most blessed, prosperous, powerful nation on earth. From the very beginning, they foretold it, and what they foretold will come true. America would rise to heights no other nation had ever known. Not that it was ever without fault or sin, but it would aspire to fulfill its calling. What calling? To be a vessel of redemption. An instrument of God's purposes, a light to the world. It would give refuge to the world's poor and needy, the hope to its oppressed. It would stand against tyranny. It would fight more than once against the dark movements of the modern world that threaten to engulf the earth. It would liberate millions, and as such as it fulfilled its calling or aspired to, it will become the most blessed, the most prosperous, the most powerful, and the most reverent nation on the earth, just as its founders had prophesied. Now, that's what he was saying here was America was dedicated to God just as Israel was dedicated to God. A lot of our laws have to do with Jewish laws.
Amen.
Because America was founded upon, Jewish principles. And those that came, amen, like from England, the early Puritans, they came and they blessed this country. And they said, if you follow God, God's going to bless you wonderfully. As I go on, not today, but I'm going to give you more documents on that. But America was blessed from its conception. Y'all follow me so far?
Amen.
Okay. But there's another side to the covenant. If ancient Israel fell away from God and turned against his ways, its blessings will be removed and replaced with curses. In the middle of the 20th century, America began officially removing God from its national life.
Come on.
It abolished prayer and scripture in its public schools. As ancient Israel had removed the Ten Commandments from its national consciousness, so America did likewise, removing the Ten Commandments from public view, banning it from its public squares, and taking it down by government decree from its walls. In Oklahoma City, there is a statue of the Ten Commandments. Satanists want to put a statue representing Satan right next to the Ten Commandments.
Wow.
Jesus.
Wow.
A goat head with a human body.
Wow.
As it was in ancient Israel, so too in America. God was progressively driven out of the nation's public life. The very mention of the name God or Jesus in any context became more and more unwelcome unless for the purpose of mockery and attack. See, that you have to be politically correct today.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're right.
And when you listen to people pray on a political scene, they say, in your name.
Yeah.
You don't have to hear in Jesus' name.
Right.
Because you want to be politically correct. You don't want to offend anybody. And as God was driven out, idols were brought in to replace him. Idols of sensuality, idols of greed, of money, success, comfort, materialism, pleasure, sexual immorality, self-worship, self-obsession. The sacred increasingly disappeared and the profane took its place. It was another kind of spiritual amnesia. The nation forgot its foundations, its purpose, and its calling. The standards and value it had long upheld were now abandoned. What it had once known as immortal, it now accepted. Its culture was increasingly corrupted by the corrosion of sexual immorality, growing continuously more crude and vulgar. A wave of pornography began penetrating its media. The same nation that had once been dedicated to spreading God's light to the nations now filled the world with pornography and with the obscene. The things that they show on TV now and prime time, it would be a disgrace to show back in the 50s and 60s. You don't have to go to an X-ray, a porn shop to see sex on TV.
That's right.
Wow.
Just turn on one of these soap operas.
Scandal.
We all like Scandal.
Yeah.
My God, I was like, ooh, me. It's on TV.
Yeah.
What's his name? I forgot his Wilkinson was his name. David Wilkinson had a vision in 1972. And all these things would happen. And people dogged him, the church dogged him. But when this stuff started happening, they took a second look. 10 years after removing prayer and scriptures from its public schools, the nation legalized the killing of its unborn. The blood of the innocent now stained its collective hands. Israel has sacrificed thousands on the altars of Baal and Molech. But by the dawn of the 21st century, America has sacrificed millions. For its thousands, judgment came upon Israel. What about America? So since 1973 up to 2014, there's been approximately 50 million babies aborted. 50 million. Some say 52 million babies have been aborted in America alone. I'm not talking about in America alone. 50 million babies. That's what Israel did.
Yes.
But they put them to the fire and burned them. Have you ever seen what happens when the child is aborted?
Yes.
I went online and saw it. I shook my head. I went on YouTube and saw the birth process. And I saw how intricate, how wonderful, and how sacred it is.
Yeah.
That God forms this child. And when the time comes for the mother to know she's pregnant, there's already a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Israel took their kids and sacrificed them. America has taken kids, 50 million of them, and sacrificed them. I'm going to be through reading. It's all happening again according to the same pattern. According to the judgment of ancient Israel, the 9 harbingers that appeared in the last days of ancient Israel are now happening in America. Each one manifesting on American soil. Each one containing a prophetic message. And upon these messages, the future of the nation, it hangs. America has deafening ears to God. So as with Israel, the alarm would have to grow louder and the calling more severe. So what God did in September 11th, 2001, God was hollering at America. And one of the harbingers, number one harbinger is, I'm not going to get different ones, I don't have time for. But the number one harbinger was this: when Israel refused to listen to God's warnings, what God did was He allowed the Assyrians to come into the land and ravish the land and tore down their structures, tore down their homes. It was called the breach. In 2011, God allowed an enemy to breach our security and attacked the nervous system of the nation. Because there in the Twin Towers was a financial structure. I won't have time to get into it. I'm going to get into some more of this. It was the financial structure of America. America was proud. That's why they erected the Twin Towers, to show our strength of our economy. But God says, I'm trying to talk to you. You don't want to hear what I'm saying? I am going to allow the enemy to attack where you are most proud.
Come on and teach, Apostle. Teach. My God.
It was a breach. In other words, the removal of a hedge. Its hedge of protection was removed and its walls were breached. That's what happened in Israel. So on September 11th, the walls of America's national security were breached. And let me tell y'all something. Well, let me read this part here. It says, evil men were behind it. Up to that point, they had been restrained. But that restraint would have its limits, as with the attack on ancient Israel. An attack will now be allowed on American soil. Look at me. Listen very, very carefully here. Now, when 9/11 happened, there was a lot of discrepancy about it. And the discrepancy, when I began to listen to it and really analyze it, the evidence The evidence is right there in my face. I said, oh my God, how could they perpetrate something like this? Let me tell you y'all a secret. You see, oh my God.
Help us, help us.
What happened on 2011 was planned back in the 60s. It was classified information. And when I began to understand and see the evidence of this, I want you all to stop and think a minute. Go to the Pentagon. Do you know why the Pentagon was hit? Because America doesn't have walls around its coastlines. But the wall of protection is the Pentagon. Because that's our military strength. God allowed a missile to fly into the wall, to breach the wall. Now someone said, that was a plane. It wasn't a plane.
Come on.
They found no wreckage of a plane.
Come on. Make it plain.
And when you look at the wall, all you see is a hole. Don't you know